All right, thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about is business continuity, disaster recovery. We're going to talk about this more from a high level, and we'll be dipping into the technical stuff, but more from an explanation and example standpoint. I will be using various technologies as examples for how we accomplish this, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only options that you have. So, but I want to go through, and one of the things that I want to really go over is the difference between what we used to call disaster recovery and business continuity. In a lot of cases, when we consultants come up with new definitions, it's ways for us to raise our rates. But in this case, there actually is a difference between them. Disclaimer of all, I always lift slides from vendors, and the vendors that we work with, so they're pretty much okay with that. And again, good luck as far as staying on topic. We're going to talk about some tools and techniques to identify and quantify your exposure and risk from a business standpoint. And this is really from the organizational standpoint. We're going to get into the technology towards the end, or the second half, if you will. But we're going to talk about the exposure and the risk. And we're also going to talk about it not just from the, oh my God, the asteroid just hit, but also from the small things. Oh, it turned out somebody deleted something. Oh, it turned out that one piece of equipment, one person, one piece of software has an issue. And then prioritizing business continuity. Because in some cases, you may have 4 or 5 business processes, but one of them is critical in terms of timeliness and responsiveness, and the other 4 aren't so much. So to approach all of them with the same level of preparedness doesn't make necessarily a lot of sense. We'll talk about prioritizing. We'll talk a little bit about the evolution of backup and recovery technologies, especially with virtualization and cloud. They've changed, and fortunately or unfortunately, on one side of the fence, you have the whole IT world has gotten so convoluted in terms of how many options you have. It's just such a solution-rich environment. So too, the options for backup and recovery technologies. And the issue is not so much, did you get the right one in an empirical, it either is the right one or it isn't, but are you aware of both the strengths and the weaknesses, the costs and the benefits of your strategy, and more importantly, is management aware of it? And you know, how many geeks do we have? Okay. I like the one is like, yeah, I kind of am, yeah, a little bit. And talk about really that quick recovery solution. So now, I've got this, I just threw together Acme Widgets as an example company that we're going to use as kind of a focal point for this. And we don't need to get into this too much. By the way, we will be mailing you this presentation, so you'll be getting this within the next day or so. But let's talk real briefly on the difference between disaster recovery and business continuity. Disaster recovery, I did my first disaster recovery plan back in 1984 for the city of Cleveland Heights when I was DP manager. I think technically I was EDP manager, because that's a long time ago. Disaster recovery is essentially, we accept the fact that services will be down for a period of time. We accept the fact that the business will not operate as usual. There is going to be interruption, there is going to be loss of service, there is going to be bad that happens because of this disaster. How do we recover? So the term actually implies that there is loss, all right? Because that's all we could do at that point. Now we're talking about business continuity. Business continuity is different. Business continuity is, how do we keep going in spite of the event? How do we minimize the interruption, minimize the downtime? If you look at it at a difference between if we're in a race and we take the car into the pit stop, we're continuing the race. We're not interrupting it. We're doing a short interruption and boom, we're back in it again. Versus, I got into a crash, I got to take my car to the shop. I'm without a car, what am I going to do? And I literally just thought of that analogy, and I like it. I know, it does. The real one would be that they could do the pit stop without the car stopping. That would be true business continuity. And I don't want to be the guy cleaning the windshield or whatever. Anyway. Changing the tire. That'd be cool. Lean to the left. So all we've got is, we've taken it as a manufacturing company as an example. We've basically got orders processed by the sales department. So we've got email, we've got by phone, manufacturing's using it. We've got 5 in-house sales. We've also got regional sales folks. We've got people working outside of the business, so they're working physically located in different areas. We've got folks on the shop floor. We've got some dollar amounts, all of that kind of fun stuff. Email, so they've got cloud services using Office 365. They've pretty much just got one server, so we're keeping it relatively simple. Now, I don't care about any of these numbers at this point, except as an example to kind of walk through. And the idea, though, is that can you with your organization, can you walk through and come up with some simple or similar numbers? Now, I want to stress that for the most part, when I'm talking this, I'm talking for the business people. So, because IT cannot say productivity costs. You cannot tell me, or if you can, you're not just IT, which is great, all right? This kind of gets back to your comment about your prior IT person. If they were more COO, they would have idea of what the productivity costs are. But we want to know what the impact is on the or on the business in terms of either the productivity being there or the productivity being lost. Okay? And one of the toughest things to do, if you're the IT guy, is to pin down the business management with these numbers. Okay? Because part of it is, and I'm going to speak ill of business folks, is we hate to be pinned down of it's $17, it's $47, it's $180. It's just for planning purposes. It can be a wild seat of the pants guess. Okay, but it helps us prioritize and design an appropriately sized response. So the questions that we want to go through, if their one server is offline for an hour, well, we can, we've got maintenance work, we've got people, send people to lunch early, people home early, we can do whatever. What about for a day? What about for a week? Will sales suffer? How will customers react? What's the cost if we lose data, meaning we have to recreate the data? When we're talking about the application server, the file server, where we store our documents. How will shop floor handle the outage? Are they a shop floor that basically does all of their processing, all of their planning in the morning? So the shift for the day will be fine, but tomorrow they won't be? Again, how will customers react? Are you involved with any kind of just-in-time processing? Whatever. Same question. You'll notice how we're able to ask these very similar questions for different devices. Okay? The better you have defined these questions and answers, the better you can design a response to it. So, how long can your business afford to be without access to your IT services? I prefer a what's the cost, but at what point is the pain felt? So recovery time objective and lost productivity cost. So the recovery time, how long does it get us? How long do we want to make it before we can recover from that outage? And then what's our cost in terms of productivity? And you can be as detailed as you want to be. How much information can you lose? If we do a backup every hour, I stand to lose up to an hour of data. So if I back up every hour on the hour and our server goes down at 10:05, I've lost 5 minutes of data. Hopefully that's not critical. We go down at 10:55, I've lost 55 minutes of data. That might be more critical. Do you trust that you have adequate plans or abilities to meet those objectives? If you've never gone through the exercise, the answer is probably no. And actually, to be fair to myself, I probably should have changed that. Do you know that you have adequate? And then when is the last time you tested your recovery plan? It actually should be a BC plan, business continuity plan. Does any of this concern you? Okay. We have worked with probably about 80, maybe even, no, on some level or another, we've worked with about 120, 130 companies. On some level, beyond just simple project work, we're probably talking about 70 or 80. And we've probably had 10 companies where we've gone in and part of our assessment has been, do you know you don't have good backups? Well, yeah, we do, because we take the tape home every week. Okay, do you know that tape hasn't been written to in 4 months? I hear it buzzing. Okay, do you know that it's backing up the wrong stuff? It's not backing up your data. Do you know that it's backing up your data in a way so that the data can't be used? Do you know it's not backing up these systems? Yada, yada, yada. And those are usually fun conversations. You know, and the problem with some of that is that there's a separation between church and state, between IT and the business process, and this gets back to some of the conversations we were having, where IT just assumes that the backups are appropriate because it looked good. Oh, well, it turns out that if this workstation isn't backed up, because that workstation has critical operations, critical process, critical planning, whatever, that actually the data on the server doesn't really help that much. Or, well, yeah, but we've got 10 people who are working off-site and they've got their data, which is critical, but we don't back that up because we're only backing up the server. Or whatever. And then I'm not using those as specific examples, but general examples to show that there's often there's a distance or a disconnect between the business and the IT process. And this is actually an opportunity to close that gap. To actually, you know, and business has to be willing to do this, and IT has to be willing as well. But we need to define what's important and what's critical. So let's get more granular. Let's say there are specific sets of applications. Let's say that, again, keeping in the manufacturing world, that we have CAD operators. How long can they be without? Okay. Can they be without specific applications on their desktops? That, yeah, even if the server goes bad, their desktops, they can keep operating, but if their desktop goes bad, that's really bad because now we've got, you know, they're trying to live up to the customer's expectations. So you take whatever your business process is, or whatever the critical tool is, and you repeat those questions. What happens if the internet goes out? What happens if email's lost? What happens if this particular application, if this particular file share, if this particular workstation, if this particular person? What happens if we lose productivity in an unexpected way for any of those resources? What's the cost? What's the cost to rebuild? What's the cost to repair? What's the cost to catch up? Now, how granular? This is where, because a lot of this stuff is pretty standard business continuity stuff, honestly, that's up to the business. Because there are certain things. We don't have a backup to the birthday list. Okay, let's not care about that right now, okay? Because there's smoke coming out of the server room. Let's deal with that. So at some point, we can essentially say, we have general backup to the servers, we have general backup to this, all that other stuff can be consolidated into that. But here are the operations that make our business specifically successful to our customers and to our stakeholders. These are the processes. And who can define that? Only the business folks. Now, IT can lend opinions, absolutely, and should. And I've talked before on how IT people, if you don't understand the needs of the business, then you're easily outsourced. Okay, if you don't have answers to some of these things or insight onto some of these issues, then why can't your job be done by somebody from India named Tom? Now we get to the technical side, and we're just going to dip into this for a moment. You do the same thing, and this is where the business people have to hold the screws to the technical people. You ask the same questions about the technology. What if that breaks? And again, how granular? As granular as you want. What happens if the server breaks? What happens if the internet connection is lost? What happens if the switch is bad? What happens? Bum, 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 bum. And you then gauge the likelihood of failure, the cost and time of remediation, and in some cases you say, well, let's get another one. Let's have 2 servers. Let's have a spare switch. Let's have 2 internet connections. Let's have 2 firewall routers. Let's do any of those things. Now, you may look at it and go, no, we spent a lot of money. That's a really good device. It's protected by power, UPS. It's fully patched. We've got it locked down. I'm okay with that. Mark Twain famously said, it's okay to put, pardon my French on this, it's okay to put all your eggs in one basket. Just watch the goddamn basket. Okay? That's fine. But what you don't want, and we've seen this, we had one client, and the client had about 80 users, a relatively sophisticated IT environment, about 5 servers, some security requirements, all of that kind of thing. And when we went into their server room, their entire network was completely supported by a D-Link router, that the kind you get for like $40 at Best Buy. And not only was that the only thing, it was literally hanging, dangling by a cable that if that cable popped out, the entire organization would be completely without any network connectivity, internal or external. And it was just in the back, just swinging there. And it was just one of those, I can now tell how your previous IT people were handling you. So what happens if it breaks? What business processes are impacted? Some processes depend more upon the internet than others, as an example. Some processes are dependent upon this server or this piece of hardware. Some processes aren't. How will we know? This is one of those things where, and especially if you are talking about when you look at servers, and servers have built-in RAIDs so that if one hard drive fails, the other ones pick up the pace. How do you know if that first one fails? Because if the first one failed 6 months ago, you don't have a RAID anymore. You're not protected by a RAID anymore. Because the second drive that fails, you're SOL. Similarly, a lot of servers we buy are 2 power supplies. If one power supply fails, the other one keeps on going. If you don't know the first one failed, it no longer is protecting you. So how do you know? What kind of monitoring do you do? Now, what's the interruption in service? And then we have 2 types of failovers, and those are going to be important as we move on to the technical side. Automatic failover with minimal data and process loss, and that's both part of the hardware and the software in terms of that, which basically means that if this device fails, this one picks up the pace without losing a beat. Okay? Versus there's a manual failover, meaning that if this one fails, we can move everything over here, but somebody has to pull a switch. Somebody has to do something in order for this one to pick up. All right? There's nothing wrong with either strategy. There are some costs associated with both. There's some vulnerabilities associated with both. But we need to make sure that it's appropriate relative to the business needs. And also relative to the likelihood. Because if we're looking here and we're basically saying it's going to cost me $40,000 extra to protect against an event that has not happened in 4 years and is extremely unlikely, and if it does happen, we're going to be down for an hour or 2, but it's not really the end of the world because we have this. It may not be worth the $40,000 to invest to fix that. But business can make that decision. If they don't have that discussion, if you never go through those issues, how do we know? I can't stress enough, these aren't IT questions. There is, and I use this term a lot when I talk about business and IT issues, abdication. It is extremely easy and very common for business principals to abdicate these type of decisions to IT. And it's also extremely easy for IT people to encourage that. I know what we need because I know the servers, I know the technology, I know all of those things. Yeah, but you don't necessarily know the business, or even if you do, it's not your role or responsibility to make some of these prioritization decisions. Yes, sir.
So I guess my question is, there really is no end to how far you granularly chase this back, because it's really driven by the nature of the disaster.
How granular do you want to be? So it's a really good question. So how granular do you want to be in terms of scope of the disaster? We're actually going to talk about that in a little bit. And when we talk about disaster, you can talk about things that are national, that are regional, that are local, that are within this location, that are within a particular technology. You can even have, and I don't mean to minimize this at all, you could have a single person's disaster, where one person has lost a piece of critical information or a critical application. And if any of those risks are risks that are significant enough to the business leaders of the organization that we need to look at it, then we need to look at it. In fact, if you take a look at, and there's a slide here later on that talks about the type of disasters, you'll see one of the disasters was power, loss of power, and you'll see that larger businesses actually suffered less, if I remember correctly, than smaller businesses because they had generators. Yeah. So beyond the backups, they actually had the generators that would continue power for that particular location for a period of time. So you have to scope, it's the exact same question. How granular do you want to get? But it's a good point that it's not only vertical, but it's horizontal. Because you can, and we'll talk about this, you can actually engage the cloud so that your services are still available even if you're completely cut off both from electricity and from internet connection, if there's value in that to your customers and your organization. And we'll get into that in a bit. So what is a disaster? Anything that disrupts. And you'll notice we have the natural disasters because we love to talk about those. However, only 2 to 3% are actually the natural disasters. And obviously there's regional issues there. I work with, or I have a few groups of, we're called managed service providers, what we do. And there's a couple of us, or a couple groups of us, and we're preparing for Hurricane Matthew. One of which is, one of the reasons is my youngest grandson is named Matthew, and I know the kind of damage he can do. But I know some MSPs who are down there in that neck of the woods, and not just me, but some other guy. We've basically said, hey guys, if you need some help, for us to remote in and help you guys, let us know. Why? Because they are more likely to get hit with those kind of issues. So when we take a look, and these are old. These are I think about 3 years old. So I would probably say security breach is probably closer up to about 14. And I would like to think that the hardware failures are probably down correspondingly, because the hardware is getting better and better as far as being able to self-police itself. Yeah. So, but we've got all sorts. And the hardware failures, again, could be specifically against one particular aspect of the business of the organization or business process. It could be across the whole area. We also have human error. Somebody deleted something. And keep in mind, a disaster is in the eye of the beholder. All right? So you could have a situation, and we're going to talk about this towards the end, a situation where somebody deleted files 4 months ago, and you just realized you needed it. And that, to a degree, is a disaster. Now, it's self-inflicted because someone deleted it, and it's very different. It's very different from I deleted something yesterday. Okay, in a lot of cases, when someone says, I have backups, the immediate implication is, I need to recover from yesterday. But you do have those situations, those scenarios, where I have to recover from X period ago. And you need to be very, very clear on this, especially if you're in the cloud. And again, this is going to be one of our last discussion points, but one of the big issues with the cloud is that the cloud offers a certain removal of responsibility. It's not your responsibility to back the data up, because that's what you're engaging the third party in. And that's great. They will do it. Almost all of them will. However, they will not necessarily do it in such a way that you have granular recoverability historically. Now, there are third parties to the third parties that will offer that, especially when you're looking at file storage, email, SharePoint sites, all of that kind of fun stuff. But you need to make sure that what you have or don't have from your recoverability standpoint. So, but we have the human error. Somebody did something wrong, usually data oriented. But you actually, if you will notice that a lot of the ISPs have had outages, regional outages over the past year or two, where Comcast, Time Warner, any of those guys, they will just almost all of them are from applying patches onto old routers because they're trying to get ready for IPv6. And a lot of their older connections and their older technologies, which is critical to them, it turns out they really weren't as ready as they thought they were. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So what is a disaster? And if you look here, when we talk about the organizations who had it, and I want to be clear, this is from 2011. Okay? 2011, we did not have the ransomware world. And by ransomware, again, some of you guys who are here for the security, the bad guys have found a way to make it pay, so we've got a lot more inventive and a lot more money being thrown by the bad guys at their game. So it's become much more serious than it ever was. So I would suspect that this would go up. This has gone up probably about 5-10%. I'm not sure what would have gone. I would think that this would have gone down a bit as well. But in any case, you'll notice the power outage. This is what I was talking about here. Large organizations are much more likely to be prepared against power outages in terms of generators and the like than smaller and mid-sized organizations. But application failure for large organizations, well, yeah, because usually they have ERP systems, so if there's an application failure, it's across the board. That's where you see the ERP systems and the like. Whereas for the small and mid-size, really, it's these guys. And you can actually go to the top 4. So the disaster can be all over the place. And you can actually use this as kind of, okay, what happens with these? What happens in these scenarios? When we talk about importance of continuity, and this is one of those weird ones, the Gartner Group study, the 10th most important reason of continuity as far as the importance of issues for the operations of the organization on a day-to-day basis. Number 10 was improved business continuity. Now, I want to stress, this is a slide from one of our vendors, okay, who's trying to sell you on business continuity. So, number 10 should be number 1 on the list because otherwise we may not sell you our services. But their point is that all of these other 9 issues, if you have an interruption of service that is too long to your customers, the other 9 will lose ground very quickly. That's the challenge. If all of a sudden you've been doing great customer service, but remember that one time. You never remember the time that the service worked. You only remember the time where it didn't. I love the 44% believe IT outages damage staff morale. Who cares? Sorry, that's just. But yeah, IT outages damage the reputation. And by reputation, the expectation that you can deliver on your goods and services in a timely fashion as you're expected to for your customer loyalty, absolutely. You know, nothing mucks up customer loyalty than I can't do what I promised I would do. This was one of the more, I can't remember, there was one study in particular that caught my eye, and it's a little out of date. Remember the California earthquake back in the 90s happened? Everybody remembers because it happened during the World Series. San Francisco, yeah. 93% of companies that did not get back up and running within 10 days were out of business within a year. And that was back then. So we could look at this. This is basically the it'll never happen to me, blah, blah, blah. If you truly believe that, then why are you here? But one of the other things that's happened is we've made it more complicated. I mean, we used to be able to say, even just 2 or 3 years ago, I need to make sure my servers are backed up. As long as I make sure my servers are backed up, I'm okay. But now, we've got multiple locations. We've got people who are working on site, they're working off site, combination, they're also working online and offline. We have people who are using their own devices, company devices, other company devices, and then we've got data all over the bloody place. So anybody who thinks one solution is going to fix this, just like security. When we talk about security, 5-10 years ago, it was antivirus. When we talked about backups 5-10 years ago, back up the server, rotate the tapes, update your viruses, or the antivirus, whichever way you fall. We're not judging. But now, one size doesn't fit all. And you have to either minimize the importance by saying, well, we really don't have people working off-site. Yeah, you can get your email, send and receive email, but that's pretty much it. We don't have a lot of people with data at their homes or working remotely or the like. Or the only data we have in the cloud are really the cloud backups. You can minimize some of these, but you have to be sure that you understand where the stuff is. And you have to run through the same exact process. And this is really true when we start talking about people who are taking work home. I work on stuff from home. I don't know what that means from a technical vulnerability standpoint. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that you've got this USB drive that if that ever gets out, we are doomed? If you ever accidentally put it in the wash, we are doomed? If you ever find out what your kid puts on that stick because they use it too, you are doomed? As examples.